9:30. So we will call the meeting to order. We're going to start with today's presentation. Greg, you want to introduce our speaker?
Happy to. Good morning, everybody. Dr. Ann Mayo, she has a PhD in entomology, and she's going to be our speaker today. And just to give you a little background, when I first became the vice president in charge of programs, I contacted her, so that was like 2 years ago, and tried to work a time for her to speak to us. And because her class schedule at the Weatherford College, it didn't work out. Anyway, so then I tried again this year, and I had her scheduled earlier this year, and she got sick the night of, or the night before she was supposed to do a presentation for us. And so we ended up, you remember we had an A&M video about freeze and all that sorts of it. It was very appropriate. But anyway, so got back in touch with her, and we worked out where we could, she would record her, she's moved to Virginia, and so she couldn't participate in her class schedule again. So we recorded her presentation, and that's what we're going to see today. Unfortunately, you can't ask questions at the end, but she's provided her email address, and she'll be happy to answer any questions that way. So with that, Nancy, would you like to start the program, please?
Right. Dick, you might remind everyone to mute.
Yeah, everyone, please mute during the video.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Ann Mayo, and right now I am faculty at Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia. And Greg invited me to give you a talk, and I want to give you one that's kind of bringing us up to date on what we think may be going on with insect populations right now. But I really want to focus on, I guess, my favorite order of insects called the Hymenoptera. And so the Hymenoptera consists mostly of ants, bees, and wasps, and I'm sure you're very familiar with many of the species in this particular area. So I want you to think about, though, we're talking about they are helpful Hymenoptera. Often we're concerned about them. We can get stung or bitten, especially stung. That's a real, to have a stinger is a real trait for most of the species in this group. But that's not the only thing that they do in terms of being annoying to us, or like ants coming on our picnics when we really don't want them, or invading your kitchen because they're after sugar or other food sources. So I want to kind of give you a little bit different take on this. I'm sure you're very familiar with bees, at least many species, as important pollinators, but there's a lot more to this order than that. So first, let me address some of these issues that have to do with, let me move my face out of the way here, that have to do with concerns that are going around about insects right now, both kind of good concerns, that is, we're concerned for insect populations to continue, but also concerns because they can be quite destructive. So one of the things that's really floating around right now is this idea of an insect apocalypse. And that is that there's a vast decline, or the thought, some data that supports there's a vast decline in insect species, all of them worldwide. This has been documented especially well in Europe. It's not necessarily right now showing this for all species, but it seems to be showing up in areas that are particularly heavily populated with people. And so there's a lot of urban development, suburban development, a lot of land use changes in those areas. However, there are some studies that bring this into question, and some people will claim that it's debunked. And I want to put a real caveat on that, because I think that's really overreaching, one, the data that we do have, and two, where we are headed. So Matthew Moran is a actual good entomologist at Hendrix College, and he was part of a study that was released in part, at least in summary, in a online thing called The Conversation. This is 2020, so a few years ago. And he was quoted as saying this: "Our study will not be the final answer." So in his study, he does not feel that they supported an insect apocalypse. He thinks that the declines are specifically related to areas where there's a huge or larger human population, and therefore those land use changes, pesticide use, and other things like that. At any rate, so he says their study is not the final answer. As the human population continues to grow and appropriates an even larger share of the world's land, water, space, and biomass, other species can only retreat and survive with fewer resources. I have no doubt that every time a forest is cut, a prairie is plowed, or a field is paved, the world loses some of its animal and plant life. And that's pretty much my sense overall. So people will ask me, are there particular insect species that are endangered or other species? And while there are some that we definitely have listed as being threatened and endangered, I would say basically all non-human life is at risk now. And it's exactly because of this thought that he has, cutting our forests, plowing our prairies, and paving over things keeps the soil from being alive, right? It's no longer in contact with the other insects and other animals and plants that would be using that soil and keeping it healthy. But Matthew goes on to say this, qualifying this process, and is really trying to sort out what's going on.
Hang on,
More monitoring, more conservation biologists working in the field, more awareness of how human actions affect Earth's biodiversity. So not just insects, but the whole biodiversity. But it may be possible that insects who have survived for millions of years through a great many biological catastrophes are finding a way to survive in our presence too. And so I think that's quite a bit to say as well. So we know that these changes are happening, and organisms, ecosystems in their complexity are going to be adjusting to this to the extent that they can. So they're going to be changing. Insect species will change too. But as he notes, insects have been around for a very, very, very long time. First things to fly, right? Boy, is that a good adaptation for a lot of different reasons. So he's suspecting that they have the genetics that will allow them to continue to do this. However, what that will mean for these ecosystems is a really interesting question, right? What will this look like in a few thousand years, a million years, should life continue to expand and grow on our planet? Of course, we would like to be here, and we would like to have gardens and agricultural areas and natural areas as well. So those are all questions. And insects play a big part of that. So insect apocalypse, we may be moving very much in that direction. We don't have all the data yet, but we certainly know enough about the impact we're having on our environments, ecosystems, and other animals to know that this is going to be coming into play. So also we have some other concerns like the colony collapse disorder, looking at our honeybees in particular. This has been documented for sure since 2006, and they're still finding this documentation. We now know that it's a really complex situation involving multiple factors, including things like parasites and pathogens. If you remember the mites, and here's a photo of a colony that's having mite issues. So here's the little mite here. You can just barely see kind of a reddish brown spot and a little bit of leggy-like things there. So that's showing infection with this kind of mite. We also have problems with poor nutrition. So can the bees get the kind of pollen and nectar, so the sugary stuff that they usually get from flowers? Are they having to fly very far to get that? Are there other issues like pesticide exposure, right? We use a lot of pesticides in certain agricultural situations, horticultural situations. Lack of genetic diversity, right? So they're being kind of pushed through genetics because of the way we manage these bees. So if you don't know, the honeybee is not an American native, so it's imported from Europe, and they're managed, right? And they're managed especially because we like their honey, we like the wax. There are other things they produce that we often use as health foods. And of course, the pollination is really important for a lot of our crops. And then of course, habitat loss, right? Land use changes, that's affecting all organisms. But then on the other side, we've got invasive insects, right? So we're estimating, and this is probably a little bit old estimate, but an impact of more than $30 billion in the United States. This is a big deal, and we have a lot of industry, insecticides and others, to try to control these. So just a few, and I just hate this. So the spotted lanternfly we have up here at the top in the right, I think they're really pretty, they're invasive. Of course, the red important fire ant, most of you are aware of these. These ants seem to be becoming naturalized, so they're beginning to fit into our ecosystems, but of course they're altering that as they do that. And then one that's recently come into play in Texas, so it's spread that far, is the emerald ash borer, which is a beetle. We have lots of these wood boring beetles. They're metallic in nature. You can see how pretty it is. I think they're really pretty and they're really awful. They kill ash trees. So they burrow into them in such a way that it's going to kill the living part of the tree. And of course, that does kill them. At the Fort Worth Nature Center, they found them there. And most of the ash trees that I saw there, a year ago with Clint King, who is trying to do a study out there on this, they were either dead or dying. So there's obvious evidence of that. Really, really bad situation. Trying to learn how to control that by using a wasp. So biocontrol. Invasive insects. So this is a problem. How do we get them? Well, we import them indirectly. Usually they come in soil and or in wood pallets that we ship things on. So there's a big need to evaluate those pallets and really control that. It's very difficult to do, labor intensive, and we don't have all the money or personnel to do that. I'm actually on a committee with the Entomological Society of America looking at that and better ways we can coordinate with other federal groups and entomologists to try to contain this a little more so we can catch them as they are entering the country and deal with it very, very quickly. So there are a lot of concerns there, especially if you're getting firewood, not transporting it, right? Because you can have, especially things like the emerald ash borer in it, but other larval forms, eggs can also be transferred as well. And that would spread these invasive insects. So that's a big problem. We also have a lot of insects that are vectors of disease, right? Mosquitoes being a big one, they transport a lot of diseases, but malaria is a big deal, right? So across the globe, you've got a lot of children, especially, who die of malaria and other issues. Chagas bugs, the kissing bugs can carry the Chagas disease, and it's believed that that was one of the problems that Darwin had, Charles Darwin. And then, of course, bed bugs, those have really come out more and more recently, but we've also got fleas and a lot of other insects that either spread disease or they're pests in some ways. They bite, sting, cause allergic reactions, and other kinds of issues for both people and plants and animals. So a lot of bad things there, right? Want to control that. We also, of course, have agricultural pests, horticultural pests, and the big thing of swarms. So locusts, especially, we see this in Africa, and that's going on constantly. Even this year, we've had huge swarms. And of course, what do? They actually are so populous that they go through areas and consume everything. And so that's not only not good for the environment, of course, it's not good for people either. And it's really, really a bad situation. I'm sure many of you are aware of aphids and beetles that attack our gardens and rose bushes and things like that. Grasshoppers are pretty horrific in their consumption as well. So we've got a lot of these. Of course, they're part of the ecosystem, but they can easily get out of hand. So these are all issues of insects in good and negative ways, right, that we have concern for. Potential causes for a lot of this when they really get out of hand are human intervention in our natural world. So changes in how we use the land, paving over the land, right? So you're sealing it off from the natural processes that it would be part of. Land fragmentation, so where you might have had a prairie extending from Canada through Texas, and it's now chopped up, right, in a lot of different ways. You can see how important that would be easily if you think about the bison, how they used to roam our country, and now we're trying to bring that back in certain areas. But they certainly can't roam that great distance anymore. So for those bison, they need larger areas and larger areas to transfer, to move from one area to another. So any land fragmentation would really affect them. But insects are smaller, and so they're looking at land fragmentation in a very, very different sense. And they may not be as immediately affected, but for instance, some insects will like border areas, so like between a prairie and the forest, they may need a lot of that kind of area, move into maybe the prairie to hunt and feed, but move into the forest to nest and rest and be more protected. So you have to consider how all of that changes as we do things like you see in the photograph at the top. We plant some trees, we have crops, we then mow down the crops or cut down all the trees. We turn it over for pasture land. In Texas, there's a big deal, right, with the mesquite coming in. It's fairly invasive in your area around Fort Worth and Dallas because those farms, those ranches have not been handled very well. So while mesquite's native, it's out of control. So it's become invasive in those areas. Of course, currently we also have the issue of climate change. As climate warms up, what happens in terms of insects is they are going to emerge earlier in the spring, but the flowers are flowering based on the sunlight. So the flowers are not going to be there. So pollinators and other insects that would feed on those plants are going to arrive, hatch, develop, and not have a proper food source. And then that means you don't have the insects, so you don't have the pollinators for the plants when they actually do flower. So that's a whole bit that's getting off or out of kilter because of these issues. The other big thing goes into importing these non-native plants and then creating an environment that's good for them. St. Augustine grass is a big one, right? So where does that come from? That comes from where the red imported fire ant is quite numerous, right? And what do? You plant it, you water it a lot because it wants a lot of water and it likes it's hot and wet. That's what it likes, and that's what the red imported fire ant likes. So as many of my ant biology friends who live in California will say, plant natives and you can get rid of the invasive ants. If you plant what grows in your area, you're not going to have nearly the issue because those insects are coming in as we provide the same kind of environment that they came from. Foreign plants, lots of water, and you've got the heat, right? So that's a big way potentially to control them. The other thing, of course, I mentioned before, a lot of them are coming in wooden pallets or soils. If you're importing foreign plants, they can be in that soil as well or associated with the plants in some way. So what's going on then? We have possibility for human intervention. So we've kind of already done this, right? By doing all the land use changes and fragmentation, we have taken over managing these environments, whether we intend to manage them for the health of the natural system or not. So what we've primarily done is do stuff for our own benefit. We want to have roads, we want to have shopping areas, we want to have schools and hospitals and, you know, sports arenas and place to go ice skate and, you know, parks to walk our dogs. All those kinds of things are changing a lot of the environment. And then we plant these foreign plants. So we're really recreating an ecology, and it's a false ecology, right? So the natural world and the insects don't fit in well with that. And that's going to affect this greater ecology in which we actually arose, right? So if you think about human origins, we didn't arise in New York City or Dallas, right? That wasn't the kind of world that we arose in. So all of our needs for basically food, oxygen, right, clean water are related to these ecosystems and how they at least used to operate. And what I want to raise to you is that in the midst of all this stuff we're concerned about, gardens, depending upon how you manage them, they are artificial systems, but they can be more naturalized with native plants and relying more on the natural water that's going to be going on, including within climate change. And in that way, gardens can begin to serve a kind of greater purpose. So we're talking about trying to reimagine them as not exactly the natural system, but something more like that, so that we can bring that back in. So fragmentation, land use changes, we've changed it to things that the native insects don't deal well with, and that allows, in many cases, the invasives to be more popular and the ones that are native to get out of control, like the locust swarms. But if we balance that with our own personal areas of gardening or land that you own in more of a natural way, then we can resolve some of those issues, at least there. So you kind of reverse the fragmentation in a negative sense that way. So gardens, again, they are artificial ecosystems because we do put a lot of effort into them and we manage them, right? We arrange them for the beauty of how we want the plants to interact. Of course, you can do this more naturally as well. So this photo just shows you a native plant garden, and I don't remember where this photo was taken. But you can see, of course, the more manicured lawn behind it, but you could do your whole yard this way. And I understand, at least in, I think, Fort Worth, if you have a plan for your native garden, all you got to do is show you have a plan for how you're doing it, and you can do that. So the idea is using gardening techniques that will affect the garden, but also give it extensive impacts on the area. So you're going to change the way the soil is relating because you're using native plants, and that's going to start a whole cascade of a different kind of ecosystem versus when you're planting artificial plants, or that is plants that are not native. And regardless of all this, whether you have a natural garden, one that's more native or not, you're going to have Hymenoptera. You're going to have ants, bees, and wasps. And this can be a really good thing. So we want to look at how they can be really, really helpful. So native versus non-native plants. So in general, when you have the non-natives, you're going to be inviting invasive species, especially of Hymenoptera, like the red imported fire ant, but they can be introduced through your root balls, right? So coming with the plant indirectly in that sense. They're also going to benefit from the kind of watering you're going to tend to do for the non-native plants and other kind of human interventions that just keep that going. And so, as I mentioned before, St. Augustine grass, that's an open invitation for all kinds of invasive, especially ants, because most ants are nesting in the ground. So these are all kind of concerns we can have. All right, let's look then, shift a little bit and talk about, okay, what about this order Hymenoptera? So they can be negative, but what are we talking about? What does their characteristics look like? Their ecology, because that's what we're kind of interested in here, how that ecology would be beneficial in many ways. And then should you want to go this route, what can you do to attract Hymenoptera? And then I've got a couple of resources that you might want to look into if you're interested in this or some other aspects that relate to this group of insects. So you can see here, we've got a honeybee, a hornet, so a kind of wasp. The southern fire ant is a native species, so we have several fire ant species that are native. The yellow jacket and the wasp, they're just all different kind of Hymenoptera. All right, so our Hymenoptera is considered to be the third largest insect order, but let me give you a caveat. Most people will say that beetles are the most diverse, and that's probably not true, okay? So probably all the major groups, butterflies, so the Lepidoptera, flies, the Diptera, Hymenoptera, ants, bees, and wasps, and the beetles are probably about the same by magnitude, so they're probably not significantly different. However, recently there have been some folks that have really gotten on this, and they are now claiming that there should be more Hymenoptera. And this is why, because the Hymenoptera include wasps that are incredibly tiny. They're micro Hymenoptera, and they're so tiny, they're about the size of a period at the end of a sentence. And many of these wasps, most of them that are that small, are parasitoids or parasites, and we'll talk about those, on almost every other insect. So you got a beetle species, you probably have several wasps that prey on that and only on that wasp. And so just by looking at that, it's really suspected that there are probably more Hymenoptera. But anyway, there are a lot of them. So worldwide, we're talking about 90 families that we know of 103,000 species. Now, these wasps that are so tiny, we haven't identified very many of them. It's really hard. In North America, we're looking at 70 families with about 17,777 species. However, that's changing all the time. We are documenting more and more ants around the world and other areas as people have kind of sought out particular areas where there's a great deal of biodiversity, like Malaysia, and begun to send a lot of students there to do collections and then to do identifications. All the Hymenoptera are going to have chewing mouthparts, so they're not sucking up nectar per se. We have both solitary and social species. All of the ants are social. And in our social species, there's going to be a reproductive caste, so a group that are able to reproduce, males and females. And then there would be other castes that are workers that don't reproduce or have a very restricted reproduction. And you can actually have several different kinds. So in ants, you can have really different morphological shapes. So those castes have different duties in the nest, or some of them, the workers are going to be all similar. We call them monomorphic, so one form. So it just depends how complex that insect society is. With the metamorphosis, it's the typical that you're probably used to thinking about, complete metamorphosis. So you have an egg stage, a larva that's a little bit active, a pupa that is now going to be transitioning into the adult. And that's what we typically see with butterflies, right? So all of these insects will do that. The other thing, and I didn't put it on here, and that is how they reproduce. And this is typical for the Hymenoptera and not other groups of insects. And that is that the females are going to be diploid. That means they're like us, they have paired chromosomes. So if you think about it, you have one chromosome from mom and one chromosome from dad for all of your chromosomes, and that makes you diploid, okay? Meaning a complete set paired chromosomes. In this group, only the females are diploid. So all the females have one chromosome from mom and one chromosome from dad. They are from fertilized eggs. The males, all of the males are haploid. They have one set of chromosomes. They only have a chromosome from their mother. They come from unfertilized eggs. They did not inherit anything from a father. There's no father for them. Okay, sound kind of goofy? Well, yeah, it seems kind of goofy. What that means, and I'll just throw this out there and you can puzzle over it, is that the males don't have fathers, but they have grandfathers. And those males, they're going to inseminate females. And so they end up not having sons because when they inseminate the female, their sperm are used to fertilize eggs. Okay, which means those are diploid eggs, and all the diploids are female. Okay, but if those females become queens and get mated, some of that male's genes are going to be in their grandsons. All right, so you can think about that. That makes understanding the Hymenoptera really difficult genetically. It takes a while to get your head around that. I really struggled with that. All right, the other thing is you're going to have a prominent ovipositor, so ova for egg, positor, a way to actually insert the egg in places. So the female that are mating will have that, and they will place their eggs with that ovipositor. Sometimes that ovipositor can be quite long, meaning the insect can, the Hymenoptera can put that ovipositor maybe into wood and lay their eggs within that wood, or for parasitoids, lay that egg within another living animal, especially another insect. In many cases where you've got these casts, you're going to have the females that are not reproductive, the ovipositor gets modified into a stinger, and then they will have venom associated with that. So when you're getting stung by a wasp, an ant, or a bee, it's a female, and they're stinging you basically with their ovipositor. That's something else you may find relatively humorous. So in this group, we divided up into two groups, the Symphyta and the Apocrita. The Apocrita are the ones we're used to talking about, but I want to just introduce you to the Symphyta. So these are called commonly sawflies, and there's some other names too, but sawflies would be in this group. It's the smallest group, about 11,000 species, and they're going to be relatively different. If you look at this adult on the side, you can see that it's kind of the same width all the way down from the head down. So they're barrel shaped. They don't have a narrow, we call it wasp-like waist. And so their abdomen doesn't pivot. And that means that, you know, they're not going to have a stinger. The larvae look kind of like caterpillars. Okay, and these folks are, all of these species are basically pests of one kind or another. So they're not, you know, the nicer Hymenoptera. Okay, so that's our sawflies. But then in the Apocrita, we have these three groups, the bees, the wasps, and the ants. So as we break it up, notice most of them are going to be wasps. Okay, so they've got a really interesting lifestyle, especially the ones that are parasites and parasitoids. So for the bees, we've got about 13% of our Hymenoptera bees, about 19,000 species. It's probably more now. But of course, most of these have some kind of habit of visiting flowers, so they're getting especially nectar and perhaps pollen as well. Some of them will be social, like the honeybees, and so you've got hives, but many of them will be solitary as well, and you're probably familiar with some of those as well. They're going to be really fuzzy because they have these hairs that are branched, which makes them look more fuzzy, and they actually can use these hairs to collect the pollen, and in some cases they'll have a special structure on their hind legs called a pollen basket, and they'll actually clean the pollen off of their hairs and then put it back there. And sometimes you see a little bit on this wasp, the sweat bee up here, not wasp, but sweat bee. So you can see how the hind legs will often be quite fuzzy because they're so full of pollen. And I've seen some of the native bees out in the Fort Worth Nature Center that are so covered with pollen that I thought it was two different species I was seeing because they look so yellow versus some that didn't have as much pollen on them. And finally I realized, no, they're just that covered with pollen. So the hairs, the branching of the hairs really helps with that gathering of pollen. Then for our wasps, that's about 72% of our species, 106,000 species, probably more than that. And as I mentioned before, the size ranges greatly. So they can be as small as the period at the end of a sentence to about 7 inches. So great diversity here. And that means that there's a lot of diversity in their lifestyle. So we're talking about parasites and parasitoids here, as well as the regular kind of pests or active hunters. Mostly here we have simple hairs, and so we're not going to have that fuzzy view, that fuzzy sense that we have with the bees. Ants, a little bit different here, so not very many of these guys comparatively, 8%. And I think it's more like 15,000 species now, where they've been working in Malaysia and some other tropical areas where there's a great diversity. And the interesting thing, though, is by the number of actual ants and their weight, so their biomass, they are actually a larger proportion of the Hymenoptera. Not in terms of number of species, but literally, if you count them, you've got all of these guys are social, I should say girls. So they're all living together in a colony. The colonies can be quite large. They can be trillions of ants in a colony, but you can have colonies that have maybe 5 to 10 members. And in that case, some of those species would actually live in an acorn. The whole colony would be contained in an acorn. These, though, are going to be really unique because they're wingless. So the males and females, when they're mating, often have wings. There are a few species that they would not, but typically they only have the wings when they mate. And then after that, the males die. The females will break off their wings and use their flight muscles to actually start having their first eggs and build up their colony. So those are our 3 major groups we want to spend some time with. So let me introduce you to some kind of unique aspects of their ecology and some more kind of general aspects as well. So for our non-native honeybees, right? So these are going to be solitary and social. We've got the caste, as we mentioned before. So typically there's at least a reproductive caste, males and females that can mate, and then the worker caste, which typically are males and females that aren't being able to mate, right? So what kind of ecological roles do we have for our ecology here? We have the Hymenoptera that can be pollinators, so they're actually taking pollen from plants from one plant to another. Typically that's done intentionally in this group, so the flowers are actually actively attracting them with certain colors and scents. So flowers will vary. If they want to attract beetles, they will tend to be white and very sturdy flowers. They want to attract bees, they typically are more blue in color, but there's some other colors too, and they'll have UV patterns on them that actually can act like signals to tell the bee or wasp, especially bees, how to land to get to the nectar, to get the pollen so that they do pollination. We also have an ecology for these Hymenoptera as predators, and that means that they're going after other kinds of insects and sometimes spiders, and they will actually capture those and sedate them, so give them some kind of injection that slows them down but keeps them alive, and then they'll lay their eggs on them, right, so that their offspring will develop feeding on that insect or spider. We'll have groups that are parasites, and that means that the adults are living on that other organism. If they're parasitoids, we're talking about the adult lays her eggs in that organism or on that organism. In both cases, the insect is going to kill the host ultimately. We also have some of these insects able to act as seed dispersers. So there's some ants that do that. And then lastly, they can be recyclers. So connecting things that are above the ground, like leaf litter and acorns and twigs and things like that, and then bringing it into their nest, and then bringing up deeper layers of soil and even minerals up above. So they are mixing up the soil and basically making soil. Very, very important, especially in more arid environments where you cannot have earthworms and a lot of those other kinds of organisms that would be playing that role. So they help to recycle materials. And you know that, right? If you drop some fruit or a cookie, what's on it? Almost immediately ants are going to be on it, right? They're recycling stuff. All right, let's talk about some of these other things going on here. So for our bees, of course, a lot of them are feeding on nectar and pollen. And here you got a nice native bee that's covered with pollen. You can just barely see the eyes sticking out and a little bit of the antenna. I've often seen bees like that, and they just look like pollen flying around, right? Again, branched hairs that really facilitate that. They actually just get coated with the pollen if the plants are really prolific. Then with the wasps, they can do a variety of different things. The wasps are especially good predators. So here for pollination, you might have some really specific relationships, and we'll talk about one of those coming up. Ants, they're awful pollinators. They eat it. They're not good pollinators. All right, so here's a really special story I wanted to share with you. So this is about fig wasps. So it turns out that there are particular species of wasps that pollinate figs, and they are the only insect that pollinate them. And not only that, but for each species of fig, there is a particular wasp species that pollinates that plant. And what that means ultimately is if you lose that wasp, you will lose that fig species because nothing else will pollinate it. And if you lose that fig species, you will lose that wasp because that's the relationship. It's that tight, species to species. What's going on here is that these fruits, as they're developing, so they're not pollinated, they haven't been fertilized in any way. They actually have a little opening at the end called the ostiole. And you can see the little arrow there. So the female wasp that's been inseminated, so she's ready to lay her eggs, will enter that. And as you can see in the drawing, it's kind of opened up in the center where you've got the little carpal parts where the female flowers are. So the wasp flies in and she will lay eggs in some of these. And in those, you won't get seed development, okay? So you're gonna have the eggs develop into the actual wasps, all right? And that's gonna be happening as the other flowers are actually developing into flowers, all right? What happens then is the wasp will develop and they will come out of their, hatch out. And the first ones that will hatch out will be the males. And the males will then search for females within these areas where the eggs have been laid, and they will inseminate them before they've hatched out. All right, and so they're going to do that. And then the males will leave and they'll make an exit hole. So they'll actually open up that hole and then they're going to die. So they've made an exit hole for the females to leave ultimately once they come out. The females, when they're hatching out, by that time, the male flowers are developing. And so they hatch out, get that pollen, and then they are going to exit with that pollen. And they will go to another ostiole and another fig and bring that pollen in there and pollinate the female flowers. And then lay some eggs in some of these that will not develop into seeds, but will develop the wasp instead. And so you have the whole cycle start again. So this is really unusual, right? And you can see how it's the fruit is very specific to attract the wasps and to allow them to pollinate. And then up here above, you can see some of the wasps have developed here within this particular fruit. So that's really a cool little, we call symbiosis, right? So mutualism, symbiosis, these things are living together, they're supporting each other, and it's gotten to the point where they absolutely depend on each other. Okay, so then we have ecology of predators, and this is especially going to be wasps and ants. So bees don't follow this pattern very much. So predatory wasps are typically the larger species, the ones that we're really familiar with, often because we get stung too if we're too close to the nests for the social species. So wasps can be social or solitary species. They're going to have an ovipositor for most of the females is modified to form a stinger in our social species, right? And so these guys, as I mentioned earlier, I should say girls, are preying on spiders and other insects. And what they can do is actually sting them and give some kind of venom there that allows them to be paralyzed. So they're messing with their neurology or their muscle contractions. And then they'll lay their egg on or in that prey. In some cases, they're going to build a nest, or here it's a mud wasp, right? So you've got a mud area, and they'll forage for these insects, spiders, and pack them in there, and then lay the egg on there, and then close it up. So as the babies hatch, they then have something to feed on, and then they'll emerge from that. Now, going back to the invasives, we mentioned the emerald ash borer. So it turns out that there are wasps that prey on wood-boring beetles. And so what happens is when they emerge, the wood-boring beetles emerge, the female wasp will find where they've emerged, and then they will capture one and sting it and bring it to where it's making its nest in the ground, and then make a chamber for the egg, put that beetle in there and lay their egg on there. And what we found was that some of these wasps only had the emerald ash borer in them. Okay, and what it suggests is that once they find an area where the beetles are coming out, they forage on those until they have dispersed. And so they actually fill up one whole nest using only that as a prey item. So the thought of my former student, or a student who was working with me, Clint King, you may have heard of him, is that maybe they can be used for biocontrol, right? So wasps have the potential to control other insect populations because of how they're predators. Ants are a little bit different, though, so they might specialize like some of the wasps do, but they can also be generalist and opportunistic. So over here, here's a bunch of ants on actually a caterpillar, and they're attempting to harvest a live one. They're not going to kill it first. They're actually attempting to bring it into the nest alive, which is a little bit difficult. But you can see, because they're social, they can draw on lots of members, right, to help with that. So these ants are primarily going to be eating seeds. They can be bringing in leaves and flowers, but if they're predating on the seeds, then they are controlling plant populations. At least sometimes they can have that kind of impact. Of course, some of them specialize more on arthropods, especially insects. Once in a while, they can bring down smaller prey, as you're probably aware of the problems with red imported fire ants attacking young birds and lizards and things like that, the horned lizard being one. Once in a while, they can get other small animals, so very small mammals or lizards, small snakes, but often they would be damaged in some other way in order for the ants to get them. They do a lot of scavenging as well. So again, they're going to be really good at recycling. Then we've got this interesting thing of parasites and parasitoids. So with the wasps, we're talking about filling these roles. We have many of these that are parasitoids, especially, are microscopic in size, so really tiny. The parasites are going to be the adults themselves are parasitizing other insects, especially. The cuckoo wasp is really interesting because this is a kleptoparasite. So it actually goes into, say, another wasp nest and steals the prey that it's put there for its own babies. So that's why they're called a kleptoparasite, right? Parasitoids then are, as you can see down here below, this wasp has a very long, looks like a needle sticking out of it. That's a long ovipositor. So it can use that to basically get into wood or into a gall, and it can actually go in and lay not only an egg on the insect, so it could go into a caterpillar body, but if a wasp has already laid an egg in there, another wasp might come and lay its egg on the egg that's in that caterpillar, okay? But then you could actually have another species of wasp to come and lay its egg in the egg that was laid in the egg that was laid in the caterpillar. And that can go on for about 5 levels, okay? So this is like hyperparasitoidism. And what happens then is you can have ultimately a wasp that is controlling all of those other wasp species, including controlling that caterpillar. So they can be great biocontrol agents, okay? And that's a big interest now, to get away from pesticides and maybe use wasps as well. The ovipositor, as we mentioned before, is the modified stinger, and that's going to be in our stinging parasitoids, right? So they've modified it in order to lay their eggs inside some kind of host. And the true parasitoids are actually using that to insert into the host to lay those eggs. Really, really interesting. We also have galls formed on oak trees, especially, but other trees as well. And that's also a response of the wasp laying the egg within the oak, and it interacts with the oak such that it makes a gall to protect those eggs as they're developing. So parasites and parasitoids, really crazy. Seed dispersers, okay, there are some ants that don't eat the seeds that are good seed dispersers, but it depends on something special. So it turns out this Trillium species, and I think you have Trillium gracilis in the eastern part of Texas, they produce these really nice seeds. You can see here below with these Aphenogastra ants on it. Notice the seed is this rounded structure, and then you got this kind of, it almost looks like a little bit of a flesh on top of it, so like a little bit of a fruit. That's called an elaiosome. And that is a sweetened area, kind of fleshy area, that the plant makes and puts on the seeds to attract the ants. And what these ants do is they find that, they're really good at, so to speak, sniffing out sugary stuff. They find that and they want that elaiosome, but it's attached to the seed. So they actually harvest the whole seed, take it into their nest, and all they do is eat the elaiosome. They don't do anything with the seed in this particular case. This is great, because now the seed is where? It's in the ground. And not only that, it's been cleaned up, and it's in an ant nest. And not very much is going to come in there to get it, to eat it. So it's basically been cleaned up and ready to germinate, and it's in the soil. So this is a great way for these plants to be dispersed. And there are other plants that will do that too, make this a lysome structure to attract certain ants. Now, a lot of ants eat seeds, right? So the harvester ants, you have the big red harvester ant, Comanche Harvester Ant is also out in your area, and I've been studying those, and they will eat the seeds. So they're not good seed dispersers. You gotta be careful with ants. They're hungry. But ants are the ones that do the great recycling, and that's because almost all the species actually nest in the soil. And what they do, of course, is they are digging their nest deeper. And you can see here, this is Walter Schinkel. He's retired professor emeritus at Florida State. And this is a nest cast that he did in aluminum of a species similar to our harvester ants. It's another kind of harvester ant, but it lives in Florida. It doesn't live on the side of the Mississippi, or I should say your side of the Mississippi. And you can see at the top, way up high, you've got lots of these chamber areas. So many of the ants are hanging out there waiting to go out to forage or defend the nest. And then you've got tunnels coming down with some chambers off where they would have the eggs, the pupae, as they're developing. And typically the deepest chamber would be the one where the queen is, okay? Now, part of what's going on here is that the ants, the adult ants, will move the eggs up higher into the nest or lower to put them at an appropriate temperature area for the development of those eggs and the larvae and the pupae. So there's a lot of activity going on within the nest. You've also got some chambers perhaps for their middens, their waste, but you've also got areas to store any kind of food. So they actually could like not forage for days and still have plenty of food. The other thing that's happening, of course, is you get more colony members. You make a bigger nest, you go deeper into the soil, and you're bringing that up. And so you're shifting that stuff back and forth. You're also bringing in forage. And so you're mixing up the soil, and actually they create soil. They actually make quite a contribution to that. And remember, it's not just this species, but lots of ant species are out there in any land you might have. The middens are going to be their trash areas, and often that's right outside the nest area. And especially if they're harvesting seeds, there may be viable seeds there. So for instance, with the big red harvester ant, you'd see the flattened mounds where they've cleared it, and they put little pebbles there to help warm up that area. And then on the edges, you'll have plants growing. Often it would be the species that they've actually eaten the seeds because they've disposed those seeds in their middens right off their mound, and some of them would still be viable. They wouldn't have actually consumed them. So those are ants as recyclers, really important there. So if you're interested in attracting Hymenoptera, because they're actually a big part of all this different aspects of the ecology and can be really, really important, then you want to avoid using pesticides, right? Because that's going to be damaging to these insects as well. Bees and wasps, really, really good, right? The bees for pollination, of course, and wasps for predators on a lot of the insects that are pests on your plants. So that can be really good thing to do. So what you want to do for attracting them, of course, is to find out what kind of foods that they would want. For bees, you're looking at a variety of plants with these nectar areas and extra floral nectaries. So this means not in the flower, but sometimes plants make other little areas with sugary treats to attract these insects. Often smaller and single flowers, yellow and blue. Blue flowers for bees, really, really important. Yellow as well. And planting in patches. So, you know, a little clump here, a little clump there. Big fields of the same plant, that's what the honeybees like. And remember, they're not native. So if you're talking about our native flowers, it's more like little patches here and there. So the bees are flying from one area and then to another area. And then you're also looking for prey species, right? So if you're talking about wasps, then you're looking for, you know, having food that they would harvest as well. For the water, just a variety of different things. If you have a bird bath, that can be very attractive to some of these insects. You can put out a small dish, and you see here some ideas where people have like a little water garden. That would attract a lot of these as well. And then the other thing is to have some kind of nest sites for the progeny. A big thing here you see at the top are these bee hotels. Some bee species will use those. You have to be a little bit careful about what they're actually constructed of, and have to understand if the bees in your area would actually use those, okay? Interestingly, when I still lived in Weatherford, Texas, I had gotten one of these. I was living in an apartment, so I'm up on the second floor, and I put this out on my little patio area, a little balcony area. And, you know, nothing was coming to it, but I thought it was kind of cute and blah, blah. And I thought, well, maybe, you know, but of course nothing came up there, despite the fact that I had a lot of flowering plants. And then one year I saw a little head sticking out of that. And so what happened was some ants, and they're called, they're not carpenter ants. This is Chromatogaster. I don't know what to call them. I guess they're called acrobatic ants. I don't know if that means anything to you. But they had actually burrowed in there and had made a little temporary nest there. So what they do often is come out, they might even come into your house for a little bit, and then they move out into the world again when the weather is better. But anyway, it was really cute because I could see there, like, oh, there's a little ant. So it was a bee hotel that was hosting ants. Kind of cute. All right, so my take-home message then for you is that gardens themselves can be quite dynamic ecosystems, but you have to plan it that right? This is a managed ecosystem, and you want a variety of plants to attract all kinds of pollinators. We're talking primarily about the Hymenoptera, and that also means there's going to be a special relationship, right, between you and these plants and that land and all these animals. So it's a matter of shaping your goals and expectations to be a little bit more open. So again, dynamic. And so that the garden that you actually intend may not be what you end up with if you go this more natural route. So you want to say, hey, you know, I have a relationship with these plants. I have a relationship with this area. And that means honoring these different organisms, the ways the plants want to flower, how they want to grow. Maybe they don't really like that shady area you thought they would like to be in, and maybe they like shade, but they don't like that one for some reason. So, you know, really having a dynamic relationship there. What that can do for us is give us like this great, you know, experience and the delight of, oh, it's blooming, oh, it's not blooming, oh, there are bees here. You know, you get that excitement of not quite knowing what to expect. So you can be quite surprised in what's going on and observations you might make of the plants and also the insects and their interaction. So that's going to give us some really far-reaching implications. So not only is this dynamic, but now you have created a welcoming place for these insects, right? So out around you may be non-native plants. You may have, you know, a huge shopping mall or lots of highway, but now you have created kind of a little island of this neat area where they can survive. And because most of these insects are flying, that's a big thing for most of them. Ants don't fly, but of course bees and wasps do. Then they can actually find that area, even in the midst of some of this other stuff. And if there's just a few other plants out there that they can take advantage of, especially bees, then they can survive. And they can still continue their basic relationships, right, with the ecosystem. So I want to really encourage you to think about the, at least including some native species, and maybe moving more that direction as we have global climate change emerging. So you may need to think about plants that are native to Texas that are better in hotter and drier environments, right? That can do a lot of good things for you, conserve water, and also still have a dynamic and very beautiful ecosystem and garden. All right, so some resources I want to share with you to kind of wrap this up. Two really cool books, Insects and Gardens by Eric Grissel. So actually, I don't have a copy of that book with me, but that's a really good book. And then Bees and Wasps and Ants, the indispensable role of Hymenoptera in the garden. So that's where I kind of summarized a lot of that information in this talk. But if you want to know more, that's a really good book too. And then there's this other book by Michael Proctor and some others called The Natural History of Pollination. So that's also quite interesting. And just to mention, the Xerxes Society is a society for invertebrate conservation, and they have a lot of information about attracting native pollinators. Probably Texas Parks and Wildlife does as well. I hadn't checked their site recently. So you might want to look at that. And of course, you can Google stuff as well. But the main thing is you can get away from the pesticides if you attract the wasps, right? Because you can do your own biocontrol. So that can be quite helpful. And there's some other insects I'm sure you're aware of, like the ladybird beetles that are quite voracious, especially on aphids, I believe, right? So think about that. All right, the last thing I want to do is just give you some my contact information if you'd like to be in touch. So I am at the Department of Biological and Environmental Sciences at Longwood University, which is, believe it or not, in Farmville, Virginia. This is in the central part of the state. And for those of you who know me, I did my graduate work at UTA in Arlington and then went on to teach at Weatherford College for several years. but I'm a native of this part, or basically grew up in this area. So my parents are really close to me. So I'm not like a fish out of water here. So my email address would be my name, so Mayo, M-A-Y-O, and then A for Ann and B is my middle initial, and that's at Longwood EDU. So if you have questions or just want to be in touch in any way, you can email me there. And here I am out at our environmental center. So we have a center just off campus. So this was taken from a department meeting we had. And then below there is my little darling, the Comanche Harvester Ant, which is native in very, very deep sandy prairies. There are some of these ants at the Southwest Nature Preserve in Arlington. And I, at one point, documented over 1,000 colonies in the Fort Worth Nature Center in a couple of areas. So sandy prairies aren't everywhere. We're talking 6 feet or more deep of sand. So they really, really like sandy soil. But you can see they have the typical boxy head of a harvester ant. So they're kin to same genus as the big red harvester ants. All right, well, that's what I have for you. I hope this was entertaining and helpful information. And if you have other questions I can help you with, or just want to be in touch, you can contact me. Thanks so much, and I wish you all the best. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but moving and then COVID also has changed a lot of things for us. Thanks, and hopefully you'll have a good year, good winter, good spring, good gardening. Bless you all. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Dick, if you want to try to unshare me.
Thanks, Nancy, for running the video. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we're back. We can go on to our business meeting. The minutes were published in the e-blast. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? If none, they will stand approved as published. We're going to go now to our reports of officers. Laura, do you have anything to report? Laura Miller?
Sure. Well, I can report that Brittany is at new agent orientation this week. She'll be back in the office briefly next week and then heading for a 4-H meeting at the Brownwood Conference Center. She had a meeting with a team to begin to plan the intern class for next year. And so that will be starting up again in 2022. And I know everyone's excited about that. Also, as Dick put out in the agenda, Brittany has stated that it will be fine to have people recertify with 18 hours again this year instead of the Tarrant County, which is the state requirement, instead of the Tarrant County requirement of 36 hours. We do hope to return to the 36-hour requirement for 2022. Does anybody have any questions about anything AgriLife wise?
One thing that needs to be added about their hours is that those that only get 18, less than 36 hours this year, if you don't get your 36 hours next year, you will be dropped from the membership. So this is a 1-year deal that we're allowing this year, just like we did last year. So you do need to understand that, you know, next year you will be expected to get all your hours in the right categories and everything, you know, like you're expected to do for your 36 hours.
Yes. And I do want to commend you all on the creativity that you've shown in creating opportunities for people to volunteer virtually. And I understand that we're all still, you know, working through these kind of uncertain times, but I'm hopeful that next year will be better. So.
Right, we all do.
Yeah. Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, Sharon, you have the Treasury Report.
I do, but before I deliver that, Dick, would it be possible for you to review for our members how those 18 hours need to be dispersed? Like, are there any?
I'm going to discuss that under the new business section, so I'll go back to that.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
The treasurer's report, can we post it? There you go. On the first day of the month, this was an interesting month because this month our bank changed. And so we had, and it changed kind of mid-month. But on the first day of the month, we had $58,860.97. We had deposits of $35,559.59, minus checks that were written for $8,992.80, which equaled an ending balance of $85,427.76. When we add our money market balance to that, and the money market balance was $58,215.07, we end up with total cash in the bank of $143,642.83. Are there any questions? Okay.
All right.
Thanks much.
Thank you, Sharon.
Mhm.
Okay. Greg, do you want to mention any upcoming plans that we have?
Yeah, this was the last presentation we'll have for the year, and our December meeting we'll be installing the new officers, and we'll be doing presentation of the extra miler, master garden of the year, those sort of awards. So that should be a good and exciting meeting for us, and to honor our members and installing new officers. So that's something to look forward to.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
Sherry, do you have anything on Ways and Means?
I have an announcement from Lori regarding the pansy pickup. That's going to be today. It's the same time today as the bulb pickup, which is at the demo garden, and that's 1 to 3. It's the same place it was last time, which is the road behind the greenhouse, the last gate. So you just drive by there and they'll load up for you. They are asking that if you can get there early to please do that, just because it is very cold standing outside waiting on the cars to come by. So, and then I think Sue is going to make an announcement about the bulb pickup.
Yep. Go for it, Sue.
Okay. Thank you, Sherry. As you mentioned, the bulb pickup is this afternoon, 1 to 3, and we'll be doing that at 1801. If you'll drive by with the name of the purchaser in your window, and we'll pull them and bring them to you. And there is one little hiccup. We did not receive 4 different varieties of bulbs that may have affected you. And if that's the case, there is a note on your bag, and we'll be talking to you about it. And I'm so sorry. This is another thing that was blamed on COVID. I think that's become a garbage can for everything that goes wrong. But anyway, we will. I have a notice from UPS that I should get them this Friday. So hopefully that's the case. And I did want to also express a thank you to the master gardeners who worked on Tuesday. We sorted the bulbs and then pulled the orders. I had initially planned for 4 days of work, and these people accomplished it in 1 day. So that was a gross underestimation on my part of how master gardeners work. Anyway, thank you so much, and thanks for all the bulb purchases. Tulips also are here, but we have put them in a florist cooler for the pre-chilling. They need to be pre-chilled at least 45 days, and so you'll receive those sometime in December. But that's another thing. We obviously know who you are, and so we'll contact you individually. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Sherry. Okay, we'll go to committee reports. Nancy, Earl.
I'm here. Yes, just as far as education, we are actually wrapping up our virtual series. Last this past Tuesday, Tony did a presentation on pruning shrubs, trees, and grasses. And next week it will be on perennials. And so if you have not seen her presentation or you would like to see it again, we encourage you to pre-register and sign up for that. Tony is wonderful. We had a pre-registration and then she ended up having additional information like for an additional hour. So it was really, really great and we appreciate her. So we will have a couple of presentations the first 2 Tuesdays in December, and then that will be it for this year. I'm probably going to go ahead and post all of those links. Those are all unlisted links on our TCMGA YouTube channel, but to allow people to go in and view those at least for a couple of weeks, especially if you're needing hours for education. There shouldn't be any reason why you don't receive education hours this year, because we've offered an awful lot of things that you could view in the privacy of your own home. So be looking for that. And again, we encourage you, if you want to become a part of the Speakers Bureau, contact Cheryl Whited. We're always looking for new topics as well. We are considering next year to go ahead and still have some type of online virtual presence, but we hope to begin some face-to-face classes along the way as well.
You want to talk about TRWD, Nancy?
Sure. Because of all of those virtual classes, we are on target to reach the requirement for our contract, which I think is like 106 or whatever. But I really appreciate Teresa Thomas and Kelly and Mercy and Claire and all of our members who have come in and willingly provided their time to allow us to pre-record their presentations. It's been great. And so TRWD actually has been using those presentations when we've been receiving requests from cities for specific topics. We've been able to promote those and push those out to the cities. Those are typically on Zoom. Those are usually virtual. We as Master Gardeners are usually hosting those things, but again, it allows us the opportunity to promote our message, to promote Tarrant County Master Gardeners, and then also to receive what we need to fulfill the contract for TRWD. And so I think if you've noticed, there was a lot of income that came in that was not only from, I'm sure Sharon will let you know, from plant sale, but also we've been keeping up with our month to month, so we can pay our bills as pertain to that building out there and other things for education. So we're on target, and we appreciate everybody, and we hope that you'll continue to help us pursue that for next year.
Thank you, Nancy. Nora, you want to give us you want to talk about something with the phone duty, right?
Yes, let me start share screen and show what I'm going to be talking about today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Whoops, that's not it. My bad. This is what can you see this says telephone duty information? Are you seeing that?
No, it says sign up for telephone duty.
Okay. Oh, pooey. Let me stop share. Now that I've got this open, I should be able to share it. Okay, there you go. Now you should have telephone duty November MG meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay, this is what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to add one thing now that I know that people only have to do half the hours, which means you only have to do half of your telephone duty hours. Instead of needing 2 full shifts to recertify, you need 1 shift. That means some of you have already signed up for 2 shifts, but only will need 1. If you cannot remove yourself from the calendar. Remember that, and that's not a change from the way it used to be. You never could remove yourself from the calendar. Send me an email and I will remove your name from the calendar if you've signed up for more shifts than you need or want. Okay, now, everyone should know by now how to sign up for telephone duty. This information at the beginning of this, how to sign up for telephone duty, is in every Monday's e-blast. Essentially, what you're going to see today is what's going to be the e-blast for next Monday. Also, I think Nancy was going to put a link for this in the chat, so you could get a copy of this printed out if you want. But so you go to tarrantmastergardeners.org, then to our Master Gardener Only section, telephone duty, and then the username and password is the same for everyone. Some people have contacted me thinking they'd forgotten their username and password. You haven't. It remains the same, and this is just for access to certain parts of our website that have proprietary information. So those are the same for everyone. Then you'll get to the landing page in our what was called the landing page, and it has all the information you need for signing up for telephone duty and for doing telephone duty either from home or doing telephone duty in the office. And just be aware, this is a little bit different from the sign up that we had before. If you read the instructions, which is just a short Google slide presentation, much like a PowerPoint. And it's only about 12 slides. Read that first, read the instructions carefully. Most people have not had any difficulty signing up for telephone duty. You must sign yourself up for telephone duty on your own device. This is a huge change from before where you could sign up friends and family, but you could sign up from in the office. You can't do that now. You have to sign up on your own device. And I know that's a wrinkle many of you don't like. I can't fix that. I'm sorry. Do check the calendar to see if you're working with someone and come up with a way to communicate with them, either call them or email them so y'all don't overlap work. Okay. Now, what counts for telephone duty? Let's see if I can get this to go down a little bit. Here we go. Telephone duty can be done at home or in the office. The only time you can't do it in the office is on Saturdays, of course, but otherwise it can be at home or in the office. Other work at AgriLife Extension Office, for this availability of this kind of work, you would need to contact Eleanor Tuck or Veronica Cabral and see if there are any opportunities coming up. You know, sometimes we have to stuff envelopes for them, something like that. So that would count toward telephone duty. Other work at the 1801 building, and there's not a lot of this available right now since we're not doing so much in-person stuff, but starting next year, there should be more of that. And for that, you would contact Claire Alford, and that's her Gmail, plus she's these people are in the membership handbook as well. And then the other thing that we have opened up that counts toward telephone duty hours, and this is a huge boost for you guys that really don't do well at phone duty, but request for help from Patsy Miller. And this is in every e-blast. She is seeking help to fill positions at events that have been requested, where our presence has been requested. And there's her email address to contact her or call her. She, of course, is in our membership directory. Lots of opportunities there. And those will all count towards your telephone duty. Now, remember, if you want it to count for your telephone duty, when you put this information in timekeeping, it must go under telephone and office duty. It cannot go in two places. You can't double dip one experience. It's either telephone and office duty or it's something else, not both, okay? Now, handling calls. This is something that has come up for a long time, and I thought I'd just include these things. And this information is in our resources document on our website, how to become a master gardener. We don't have a firm date yet for the next Master Gardener classes. We're not sending out any longer that pamphlet that we have on how to become a Master Gardener because it really doesn't have useful information in it. For now, all you do is collect the name, address, email, and phone number of the person wanting to be in those classes. Email that to Veronica Cabral. There's her email address. Also, give Veronica's name and contact email to the caller. Many times people have called and complained that their name has fallen into some black hole and they never got contacted. And there can be some significant amount of time between the time that they first call us and their name hits a list and the time Veronica starts contacting these people. Just so if you give them her name and contact information, they have a way to find out what's going on. Okay, requests for soil sample test kits. And you all know this is something we come up with regularly. The simplest thing to do now, particularly when you're working from home and when you're working from the office, is send them the link. And then you have the link right there. This is also under resources, and I've got it highlighted on our resources document that's on our website for those of you working from home. But send them the link. They may use their own plastic bags. It is important if they're using those plastic bags, and even if they're using our test kits that we mail out, tell them to let that soil dry completely before sealing it up in a plastic bag. Otherwise, they're going to get mold and stuff in there that's going to affect the test results. So let that soil dry, use their own plastic bags. Now, if you get a caller who does not have a computer, no email address, or no ability to print out the link, then you call the extension office. And by that, I don't mean the master gardener number. I mean the main receptionist number, which is the 884-1945, and ask the receptionist to mail those test kits and the information sheet to the caller. They have been doing this all along during the pandemic, and they've got some set out on that round table in our office so they can just dash in there quickly and grab some, stick them in an envelope, and mail them out. And they're willing to do that. You have to give the receptionist the name and address of the caller, of course. Okay, that's really all I wanted to cover. Are there any questions about telephone duty? Let me stop sharing, and then I can't hear. If someone's actually talking, I'm not hearing them very well. Are there any questions? Okay, that's all I have, Dick. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nora. Teresa Thomas, you want to talk about membership?
Sure. I want to thank everybody that's sending in their dues. Thank you very much. I've got a bunch, and a lot more need to be sent in, and my address is in the roster. So please get them in. We'd like to have them in as soon as possible and not wait till December, if possible, the end of the year. But thank you for everybody. And thank you for working on getting some of your time in. We've had a lot of questions, and I hope we're answering your questions as we put the time in. So we look forward to hearing from you, and let us know if you need any help with dues or background checks or any timekeeping questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Rocky asked me to mention in regards to the awards this year. Last year they were videotaped. This year they will be live. And of course, they'll be viewed via Zoom presentation along with the meeting in December. Are there any other committee reports? New business. After the meeting today, Jeannie Browning will be selling the TCMGA Demo Garden Ornamental Kale at 1801 Circle Drive. The gallon pot will be $5. The 4-inch will be $1.50. And I would like to address what prompted us with the change in the hours was that Teresa sent me a list of the hours so far for people in our organization. There were more than 70 people that had 0 hours or maybe 2 or 3 hours. So I asked Brittany if we could go back to the way we did it last year, which is to allow to only have to get 18 hours. In that 18 hours, you should be able to get your CEU hours, plenty of opportunities, and you should be able to get your 3 Master Gardener meetings. Otherwise, those 18 hours can be in any category for this year only. And if you do, these people that get less than the 36 hours will be monitored for the rest of the year. And if you must get your 36 hours as set out in our bylaws for next year, or you will be dropped from the membership. So please be sure and try to get all your hours. Any questions about that? No? Let us know if we can help you. There's lots of ways to get those hours. Is there any other new business?
Hey, Dick, this is Kelly.
Yeah, Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I put that information in the chat, but we're still looking for 2 persons who wanna take the leader and co-leadership in the backyard vegetable garden, in the botanical garden. This is a wonderful place, really, for working. Like I say, last month, I came working heavy in the dust, what I love, but I can't for medical condition. And my colleague, Rachel, she can't continue it as well. So if you're very interested in working with vegetables and with wonderful gardeners, really, Fridays, we are there. Tomorrow, we are there. So if you're interested in being the leader or co-lead in that garden, you can visit ours tomorrow, 8 a.m. to noon. And you can see what a wonderful work we made it there. So it's still looking for somebody, and the job is open. Well, come and see us and visit us, and maybe you find a beautiful place for make that hours.
Thank you, Kelly. And we hope you get to feeling better.
This is B. Wilson.
Thank you.
Yeah, B.
I would like to share a new gardening school project that is about to start in South Lake. Just from some background, let's see. I was trying to do it to start my video, but I can't. Some background, they lost their established school garden when the school had a building project, and so that wiped out their old garden completely. So they have tremendous support from the PTO, and they've helped in purchasing planting bins, and we already have met with the city on the water supply established. And so now we're ready to start the planning of the layout. And so it would be very interesting if someone would like to join in this process of planning the school garden. We've walked it with the principal. We have tremendous support. And so it will be a really, really fun opportunity to learn how a project is established and laid out from the very beginning. So I've posted my info on the chat area, and also I'm in the Master Gardener directory. And so it's BEA Wilson, and would certainly welcome any interested people that Master Gardeners. The teachers were very anxious to get Master Gardeners involved because they've already started, by the way, their garden club. And so it's a tremendous enthusiasm over there. So I invite you, if you're interested, please contact me and I'll give you all the scoop. They're ready to meet. And I told them, let me share this with my Master Gardener friends. And so we're just waiting to see if anyone would like to join in on the establishment of this really fun time. Thanks.
B, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Has that project been approved and submitted to the project committee?
No, it will. I have not submitted it. Like, we did all that process for Durham's intermediate here in South Lake. And so I met with them one time, and they went ahead on their own, started the garden club in the classroom. And so once we meet as far as establishing the layout and all, I was going to then, go through the steps of trying to establish as a Master Gardener school project. Is that the right timing?
Yeah, you need to, there's a short project form. There's a project form on our website.
Yeah.
And you need to fill that out.
Okay.
That to Judy Matlock.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure. Sure, we'll do that.
And you have an option of choosing, and all projects we're starting now are just short term. So you need to go ahead and get that into Judy. And
Okay.
then it can be opened up to the master gardeners and they can get hours.
Okay, what, the short term, you mean, what does that mean?
It means 6 months and then we look at it again.
Oh, I
If
see.
it looks like it's going to be a long term, then sometimes we can convert them.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'll do that.
Okay. Any other new business or announcements?
This is Sonia Land. I just have a comment real quick. If there's any tulip bulbs left over, if you could let me know. I didn't place an order for any, but Dick, I know you saw my picture from last year. I had planted 200 in one area in my front yard, and the only reason I bought them from a different location because there was the color sequence that I wanted. So anyway, just if you have any extras, just let me know, and I'm sure I can probably get some of those off your hands.
Thank you, Sonia. There's a question in chat. As far as getting your hours at the resource center, I mean, at the demo garden, you are still expected to get 4 hours. However, if you're just getting the 18 hours and shooting for that, your hours can be in any category. Is that clear? Okay. All right. Any other announcements or anything? All right. If there are no further announcements or anything, or no more business, then the meeting is adjourned. And thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Dick.
Thank you,
Bye.
Dick. Good
Good
job.
meeting.
Is there an
Thank you.
assessment form?
I'm sorry.
Is there an